So greetings, hello, it's Dr Thomas Daffern here. It's my weekly broadcast about the state of the world, Brexit, other international affairs from a philosophical perspective. Today is, coming up to 10 days or so from the European Parliamentary elections. Today's May the 12th. And these elections are opening in Europe. They're running between May the 23rd and the 26th, so 11 days. They're very important, and the first thing I want to say is about these elections that are coming up. I think it's very important that everybody votes. It's an exercise in democracy, important throughout Europe. 512 million people live in the European Union, and we're going to be electing 751 MEPs. I'm delighted that Britain is taking part, obviously, in Ireland and here in France and everywhere throughout the European Union. It's a group of 28 countries. This is an experiment in democracy that's very important. I think it's very wrong that in the UK, because of the brinkmanship being played by Theresa May and by, to some extent, Jeremy Corbyn, the decision to okay our participation in these European elections has been delayed and obscured and entered into in very bad grace. I myself applied for my postal vote some weeks ago, and I'm literally still waiting for it. I suspect there are going to be tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of people throughout the European Union who are British citizens entitled to vote, who will receive their ballot papers late. This is no way to run a country, no way to run a democracy. Britain should have been, in my opinion, happily taking part in these elections, exercising our democratic rights, and the whole way that we vote and so on should have been organised long before. I think that Theresa May has completely failed in her duty as Prime Minister to ensure our democratic rights as European citizens. Her complete willful misreading of the 2016 referendum result has resulted in that. And now we have a complex situation whereby various parties that want to remain in the European Union are all going to be competing against each other. Fortunately, the system is a proportional representation one, so any vote for a Remain party is not going to be wasted. And one has to work out the context in which you vote. I believe and hope that there will be a resounding victory for the Remain candidates. I've read that Betty Boothroyd, a senior Labour parliamentarian, is coming out to campaign for the Labour Party. Tony Blair has said he will vote for Labour because he still believes it. Deep down it's a Remain party, as I sincerely hope it is. Many people who want to remain in the European Union will vote Labour, others will vote Liberal Democrat, others will vote Green, others will vote SNP or Plaid Cymru and so on. I think it's up to everyone's conscience how one votes, and my work as an academic and philosopher in setting up this Centre for Remain Studies, which is obviously looking at the evidence in favour of Britain remaining in the European Union. It's not party political, it's a broad spectrum of opinions that I'll be working with, and information and knowledge gathering, like any authentic academic project. There are some conservatives that are strongly in favour of Remain, and to me it should be part of conservative party policy to Remain. I think it was a catastrophic error that David Cameron ever called this referendum in 2016. The only way to heal the divisions it's opened up, in my opinion, is to have a second referendum. And a clear mandate from the British people under fairer electoral terms, i.e. all 16-year-olds and up should vote, etc., whether as a country we want to self-destruct, because, as I've said so many times now, based on my 7 years living in Scotland and my friendship with many Scots, I know that they will secede from the UK over this. They're not going to accept Brexit being imposed on them from Westminster. The alienation the Scots feel from Westminster politics is already very profound. This Brexit process has thrown it into total relief. The SNP parliamentarians in Westminster are being treated abysmally by other parliamentarians, particularly on the benches opposite, the Conservatives and their allies. And so, you know, what's at stake here is, do you want the UK to survive? Do you want it to go on playing a part in Europe? Do you want us to have a second democratic referendum to enable that to happen? Or do you want us to be led down by the cheerleaders like Nigel Farage and his gang, who are irresponsible and you know, just bigged up by the media for its corporate interests? These are the spokespeople for you know, the corporate interests of the world, big capitalism, and the financial interests of the elites who brought us the illegally bought 2016 Vote Leave victory, so-called victory. It was an illegal coup, actually, and obviously there should be inquiries into it, how it was bought. What I find incredible is that this chap, Nigel Farage, has started yet another party so he can be head of it, called the Brexit Party, and it has no mandate, it has no manifesto. He's just standing on himself. And it has no policy apart from Brexit to implement that fully, whatever that means, you know. I mean, even if... So, and yet, according to the media and the polls, you know, it's doing very well. This whole thing is a media creation. You have to see through this. We, the British people, have to prove to these media barons who created the Nigel Farage phenomenon and his Brexit party. I mean, the other thing he's refusing to divulge is where the funding's come from. Well, we know where the funding's come from. It's come from offshore financial capitalist interests. You know, the most seedy type of international businessman will be funding this man. And of course they'll keep that secret. What I think is thrown into huge relief is that these things should be outlawed under British law. This man should really not be allowed to stand in an election, either for the European Parliament or for any other parliamentary body. There should be standards put in place. I've kept saying that all parliamentarians, whether in Westminster or Edinburgh or the European Parliament, should take an oath of veracity. They have to tell the truth. This man would fail. He's not capable of seeing the truth, and that's to do with his own intellectual background. Just to refresh your memory, Nigel Farage has no degree, he's never studied at university, has no credible intellectual history worth reporting on. The man simply studied at Dulwich College, which is a school, I have friends who went there, I know the area, and I've taught in similar schools. They are quite good schools, and they do provide you with a basic education. I'm not saying the man is illiterate, but he's illiterate when it comes to the study of the higher humanities, the sciences, philosophy, spirituality, religious studies, theology, all the subjects that our civilization in Europe and Britain for centuries have deemed the most important. This is someone who went on the shop floor and started trading in commodity markets, selling metals, and he's very good at shouting. He's a sort of barrow boy from the city of London who made good by shouting louder than other people. Now, I remember those days in London in the 1980s when the Thatcherite capitalist boom was going on. I remember the downsides. I remember the people of Yorkshire, the miners being laid off. I remember the people of Scotland being decimated, the industries that were shut, so that people like Nigel Farage could big themselves up into being self-important egotists. And I opposed the Thatcherite policies at the time. I don't look back on that time as a success. It was a disaster. I've just watched a documentary about Harold Wilson, how he was forced from office behind the scenes by a right-wing attempted coup organised by a fake group within MI5, documentary produced by the BBC, based on footage and evidence that was revealed on taped interviews made by Harold Wilson before he died. He was a Labour politician of great integrity. Betty Boothroyd was one of his colleagues. I worked with people who'd served under Harold Wilson. Lord Ennals, a late friend of mine who's dead now, organised with me over 30 meetings in the House of Lords on ethics and peace policy. If Harold Wilson were alive today, he would be utterly against not only Brexit, but everything it stands for, and the kind of Nigel Farages of this world. He was a clever man. He'd known Gates School. He was an Oxford graduate where I used to teach. So the Labour Party should, in my opinion, be 100% standing for Remain and opposing the Nigel Farages. And if someone of Wilson's intellectual calibre was in charge, they would be doing that. Corbyn has dithered and failed to join up the dots. His intellect is challenged when it comes to thinking through higher policy issues. But he is getting there. He is slowly realising that he is going to have to come out for Remain. He's going to have a people's vote. There's no way a deal can be agreed with the Conservative Party under Theresa May for any kind of Brexit that looks at all like anything that's useful for the British people. Even with his intellectual challenges, he's going to realise that it's against all the instincts he stands for, which is peace, social justice and all the rest. Farage and his Brexit Party are a nightmare dreamed up by media barons, largely in the States, I would say. It's still Steve Bannon pulling the strings behind the scenes. It's right-wing groups in Europe that Bannon is stirring up, like Marine Le Pen. These are kind of dangerous right-wing groups. Why on earth are we flirting with allowing someone like that to dominate British politics? It's very very daft. So I'm today in the Peace Museum. We celebrate every day different saints and sages. Today for Christians we're celebrating Gladstone, who was a Liberal Prime Minister of great integrity. When he died, he founded St Deiniol's Library, which houses his personal library in Harden, up in North Wales, and I've organised a conference there on the educational implications of 9/11. This was back in 2001. And Gladstone was a Christian, he was a philosopher, he was a visionary in politics, and his fundamental point was that foreign policy should be based on ethics. And so Brexit is a question of foreign policy for Britain. It should be based on ethical choices. The trouble with people like Farage is they have no concept of what ethics is. They don't even understand the concept. And so you can't even begin to have the conversation with them. The Liberal Democrat Party in Britain has consistently represented that tradition of Gladstone in British politics, married to the Social Democrat tradition of Lord Owen and Shirley Williams and others, who, in a sense, represented the moderate Gates School kind of line of British socialism. And so I think the Liberal Democrats deserve to do very well in this coming election for the European Parliament. I see that Guy Verhofstadt, who is the Alliance for Liberal Democrat parliamentarians in the MEP grouping, is even coming to campaign for them in Britain. So I think that's excellent. I think the Greens will do well. They deserve to do well. They have a good, policy on Brexit. They're 100% opposed to it, as they ought to be. And in Caroline Lucas, they have one of the best MPs in Parliament. I think that, as I've said before, the Green argument against Brexit and for the European Union is persuasive. Many European countries are banning fracking, they're banning 5G telephones and the kind of unbridled misuse of technology. When I was in my 20s, I was a member of the Socialist Environment and Research Association, CERA, which was something Raymond Williams was involved with, the Cambridge philosopher who wrote a very important book called Key Words, which was a philosophical analysis of key concepts in British intellectual life. He was a Cambridge academic who I met, and the environmental issue is as old as the concerns of the Romantics, going back to Blake and Shelley and the early Druids like Iolo Morganwg and so on. We care passionately about nature, and we want to protect it for all Europeans. That's why the European Union has a good green record, and the German government, Danish government, etc., are doing very well on that. And the British government should be playing its role. And so the Greens will do well. I sincerely hope that the Labour Party actually also does fairly well, because, as Tony Blair says, it also has to be encouraged as in the Remain direction, and that is its declared policy. And Tom Watson, its deputy leader, and others are proposing that. Keir Starmer as well. So I think it will get there. It's just taking a while. I know the MP in Kemp Town, where some of my family live, where I grew up, is a Labour Party man who is of great integrity. So, and Lord Ennals and his generation have passed away, but new Labour leaders are in there who need to remind the Labour Party leadership that it also should learn from Gladstone that ethics has to be combined with politics. You can't have politics without ethics. And anyway, so that's the first point I want to make, and may everyone get out there, campaign, canvass, lobby, and think through the choices, which are I don't think that difficult to work out. I mean the only people that should vote for Farage are people that really have never actually joined up any dots at all, done any thinking. I mean, what he represents is this self-interest, egotism. To me, he's a living re-embodiment of Goebbels, as I've said before. His fanatical harking on about one or two particular points are taken from the rule book of Goebbels' propaganda machinery, which was keep repeating a lie and it becomes the truth. Goebbels himself, if you study his life story, modelled it on American advertising. So Farage is the latest incarnation of Goebbels, inspired by American advertising, to dumb down everything to its lowest level. And this is what American capitalism and American advertising demands of us, that we don't think, we just buy whatever they tell us to. And much as I love Facebook and other social media, they're in danger of becoming a sort of instrument of dumbing down to oversimplify everything. With little sound bites. People no longer can, read a 500-page book of academic discourse. People can't watch a lecture more than 10 minutes, so we have TED Talks of 10 minutes, etc. People are losing their capacity to join up the dots, and I think it's disturbing. I mean, people say to me, my ideas are too complex. I should reduce them to an elevator pitch, and just 3 bullet points. Well, no, I'm a philosopher. I'm in the tradition of Sartre and Heidegger. I'm someone that follows in the footsteps of Aristotle and Plato. We think in complex, joined-up ways. Now, yes, of course, it can be reduced to shorter memes, but that's not for me necessarily to do. Let my students and friends and colleagues oversimplify what I have to say. What I have to say is very, very complex, because I'm talking to and from the beauty of human complexity. It's because we're complex that we're beautiful. All the people I've ever fallen in love with, they're complex people, as we all are, because we're spirit in matter. And spirit is very extraordinary and complex. How did spirit ever get into matter? How do we ever get into these extraordinary physical forms, which are also extremely complex? The reason I love science is because it shows us that complexity. These are the hallmarks of the divine in operation. And we oversimplify everything when we say, well, God is, behind everything. Well, what is God? What is the detail of the nature of God that has made us this extraordinary? That's the subject of philosophy, and that's what I teach and study and have done for years. What disturbs me is that public thought has become so oversimplified and dumbed down that we can have intellectually challenged oversimplifiers like Farage, elbowing their way to the top of the rooster pile, so their voice becomes heard. And the media is complicit in that, because the media is owned by the corporate interests that really don't want to cultivate too much intelligence. Let me tell you a very chilling story. When I went to Auschwitz on pilgrimage in Poland, I went to visit the museum there in honour of the people that died, and there's a hut dedicated to the Polish people who were killed. Polish officers were killed in their hundreds of thousands in Auschwitz, and in fact the site initially was a concentration camp for Polish military who were captured when the Germans invaded Poland illegally and against all conventions and so on. And what the Germans did is they rounded up the Polish intellectuals, they rounded up the elite intellectuals, the priests, philosophers, teachers, and not only if you had Jewish blood, but just anybody that had a brain. And they shipped them off to the concentration camp to sort of work them to death and to die off, because they realised that intellectuals are a threat to them. One of the ones they didn't capture was the former Pope, John Paul II, who was an intellectual, who I met at a conference in the Vatican once. He was a great philosopher, and he was a part of a resistance movement intellectually in Krakow at the time. And the Polish spirit wasn't crushed by the Nazis, but they sure tried. And what they did is, soon after the conquest, which was horrendous and brutal, they then, and also was justified by fake staging, deliberate lies, buttressed by Goebbels' propaganda machine, that the Poles had attacked the Germans first. All kinds of propaganda was unleashed. And you'll see that stuff still circulating on the right-wing internet that Nigel Farage and his cronies, lap up. And so anyway, the Germans instituted a government in Poland, and I think it was Himmler went to visit them and give a talk, and he said in a rousing speech that Polish education was going to be totally changed now. Polish education at the time was very advanced. They were very clever Polish intellectuals, thinkers, students. It was an advanced culture with an advanced education system. It was a democracy. Many of them were Jewish, and Poland had some of the greatest Jewish thinkers and intellectuals of the world, and some of the greatest Kabbalists and so on. It was the place where Trentowski coined the phrase intelligentsia. He was a great Polish thinker and philosopher. It was where Trzaskowski came from, who developed the notion of praxis as a philosophical school. He was a Hegelian on the left, like Marx and Engels, but he was, at least I would say he was probably even cleverer than Marx and Engels, because he didn't throw out spirituality. He believed that the Polish soul had an innate spiritual core, but that it had to be brought up to speed with science and modern developments in philosophy, which represented by Hegel. So Trzaskowski did a huge multi-volume commentary on the Lord's Prayer, explaining line for line, word by word, what Christ had been talking about. Now these are deep thinkers, these people. What did the Germans say? They said, we're going to change Polish education, we're going to dumb it down, from now on, all the kids will be taught in school is reading and writing and basic arithmetic, only up to a minimal level. That's it, strip the curriculum of all the humanities, the arts, all the philosophy, all the kind of sophisticated things like history of science, and all the kind of thing that made Polish thinkers so in love with knowledge over the centuries. Poetry, no, throw that out. Because we don't want these kids to become too intelligent, was what this German leader actually said to the cadre running Poland for the German occupying government. Because if they become too intelligent, they might ask questions and they might think, and that's dangerous. So the Germans instituted a new dumbed-down education system in Poland, which was deliberately minimalist, so that people can only join up one or two dots. They couldn't even do advanced maths or advanced languages or anything. It was kept to the absolute minimum, like educating slaves or serfs or robots. So that was an eye-opener. When I saw that, and the actual speech and the photographs of the meeting are all on the wall in the Polish hut in Auschwitz. If you want to track this to source, go to Auschwitz and look it up. And the hairs should stand up on the back of your head, because you will realise that's what that's what tyrannies always do to intellectuals like me. It's what tyrannies have always done to philosophers throughout history. It's why Archimedes was killed by a Roman soldier. It's why many of the great minds of Jewish thinkers were rounded up in Poland and literally burnt, killed in the Holocaust, and in Poland, in France, and all over Europe, because they were too intellectual. And the Nazi Party was a dumbed down, minimalist kind of idea that couldn't brook authentic intellectuals having another point of view. Hitler was not himself. Hitler was just like a Farage, very simplistic education, no university degree, no sensibility to the higher points of culture and arts. And so that's why I'm worried about the trend here. However, I have confidence that the British people, I've taught in Britain for 20 years, both in adult education at the universities of London and Oxford and Bristol, and in schools throughout the country. And I know enough British students, I know, my own family, and we are too intelligent to let that stupidity win. I have confidence, therefore, that these results will be a triumph for Remain, that Farage and his cronies will be seen through and sent packing. They are paid for and funded by groups that have really no fundamental moral intelligence, as Gladstone would say. Howard Williams, the great philosopher of education, who teaches at Harvard, has argued there are multiple intelligences. Sorry, Howard Gardner has argued there are multiple intelligences at work in us. Some of us are good at music, some at maths, some at languages, some at bodily work, sports, and so on. There's a moral intelligence as well, which is more sophisticated. It's a kind of joined up intelligence that operates. He calls it interpersonal intelligence, but it's also interdimensional intelligence. What Gardner leaves out of his mix is the transpersonal, which Maslow would have put in, which is a sensitivity to spirit, a sensitivity to, it's the thing that made Abraham hear the call of God, or Moses, or Muhammad, or Christ. It's the prophetic tradition that enables Druids to plug into the Arwen and to produce their own prophetic insights over the centuries and millennia. So, but I trust that there's enough Arwen in circulation in Britain. I'm a great lover of Britain. I know Wales like the back of my hand, Scotland, Ireland, all of it. I chair the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for Britain and Ireland, and I've been deeply, honoured to be able to serve as Peace Druid of Britain, and still do. And now in Europe, I'm working with the Druids of Europe. So that Druid wisdom, that Dharma that's been seeded deep into the British soul, I think is wise and beautiful and loving enough to see through the game of these cynical manipulators who fund people like Farage and their cronies. And it's ridiculous. May the spirit of Gladstone win, is all I can say. And may St Deiniol's library, which stands there as an institution dedicated to divine learning. If you haven't been there, go book in a weekend. You can stay overnight. I mean, what an amazing thing for a Prime Minister to do, to leave his library to the nation, to benefit for the study of divine learning. That's what we should be doing as Britons. We should be studying divine learning to figure out how we save our country from the ridiculous nonsense that all this dumbing down has brought upon us. And Gladstone was a kind of latter-day Druid. He was a great lover of Schliemann and the archaeological discoveries Schliemann was making in Troy. He chaired meetings in London about this, and he wrote books on Homer. You can tell a man or a woman from their library, and Gladstone's library was amazing. I've spent many happy hours browsing it. There's a wonderful 2-volume set on the nature of Zeus, for instance, by a scholar of comparative religion. Zeus is an interesting god. Don't mess with Zeus. He was the father of Hermes through Leto. Leto being the goddess, the mother of Hermes, and according to some classical sources, Leto was the original wife of Zeus, long, long before Hera came on the scene. And I think that's a very interesting story. I think Hermes was like a sort of earlier generation of deities than the later Olympians to some extent, which is why he became the god of the internet, the communications, the email, the diplomats, and the wand of Hermes was the badge of the inviolable status of diplomats and envoys in the classical world. And also, Hermes was respected by the Druids, who associated him with peace, with discussion, with mediation and so on. So, Leto, interestingly, leads me to my next point, which is that I want to talk about a second major concern in international affairs that relates to the looming possibility of war. Crazy to even articulate the concept, but that Iran and America might get dragged into some kind of actual war, with Israel as being part of it. And then no doubt everyone else will tumble in. I mean, we're talking, a very, very great catastrophe. And what I find incredible is the American media and the British media, who seem to be in their pay, seem to ratchet up this possibility as if it's some kind of policy choice. That, well, no, we'll just bomb Iran. Like an Iraq war, Mark II. Well, I've spent years, as most of my students realise, studying comparative philosophy and spirituality, and I've studied, among other things, the Iranian version of Islam, Shiism, through the mind of their great philosophers, Mullah Sadra, who was one of the greatest Islamic philosophers, their great Sufi teachers like Rumi. He wrote in Persian, and the Sufi literature of Iran is amazing. It's deep and rich, and it seems to me that there's a complete cultural communication gap between the Iranians on the one hand, the Israelis and the Americans and Western Europeans, which needs to be bridged by us philosophers and thinkers. And I'm volunteering, that in the old way they used to say jaw is better than war. I mean, in the memoirs of Eleanor Roosevelt, who lived through 2 world wars, in fact, she went and nursed victims of World War I, and then she went and helped her husband in World War II, and she visited the troops all over the Pacific, and she met Churchill, and she saw what war does close up, and it's a horrible thing. She said, I dedicate the rest of my life to making sure it never happens again, which is why she supported the United Nations. She was of my mother's generation, and I'm just continuing that vision of let's have peace instead of war, and I'm shocked that the UN isn't doing more, really. Where are its mediation mechanisms in place? When I listened to the Secretary General welcoming the delegates and heads of state at the UN General Assembly launch in September 22nd last year, I was very struck by the sophistication of the diplomacy of the Iranian representative, and very disappointed at the poverty of the diplomacy put forward by the American and Israeli leaders in particular, and the English, Theresa May, supposedly on behalf of the UK, but it's she wasn't doing justice to our potential as a nation for peacemaking. So what we have to do is we have to prevent a third world war breaking out over Iran. We have to defuse the rhetorical vituperation that's flying about. And we have to get Israeli thinkers, American thinkers, Iranian thinkers together to say, let's begin to talk about peace. Let's talk about poetry for peace. Let's have a poetry competition for peace in Shiraz. Invite the greatest Hebrew language, English language, French, Iranian, Arabic, to Shiraz, the home of Hafiz, the other great Iranian poet, and